welcome back again. So what we're going to do is we're going to design our layout a little bit, just kind of putting some views on there. I'm going to use kind of crazy colors to start with, but eventually I'm just going to make them be clear, just so that they're used for our layout, but a user doesn't see them. We'll also go ahead and connect our labels so that they're ready to actually be modified. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our storyboard, and we're going to add something called a usable area, which is just a name I made up, which is just a view. And I want this usable area to exist on both the iPhone and the iPad version we're making. So if I want it to exist on both, I go into this storyboard, and you can see that on the storyboard, you know, there's no toolbar or nav bar because neither of those exist in both cases, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a view that will exist in both cases. So I just go ahead and add it on here. Oh, I've got to be zoomed to 100%. And then what I want to do is I want to change its color just so I can see it. So you can pick any color you like, and then just fight with it until it's just kind of somewhere on your screen, right? So it doesn't have to be taking up the whole thing, but it also doesn't have to be itty-bitty. Wherever you'd like will be fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add constraints for this usable area to each of the final values. Technically, we could add the width constraint here because it is going to be tucked to the side in both cases, but I'm just going to do them all in the final values. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the iPhone version, so that's a compact width, and I'm just going to kind of set it down into that corner, and then I'm going to set it up here on the top where I consider the end of the usable area. So I don't really consider the battery to be usable, so I'm going to actually stop it there. And then I'm just going to add constraints for top, bottom, left, and right. And so that's just going to constrain it on all those sides to what I consider the usable area. And then I'm going to go do a similar thing for the iPad. So the iPad, you can see the view doesn't snap anywhere by default. Actually, where is it? Oh, it's kind of tucked up here. That's great. Yeah, I did this thing where it kind of went away on me again. I get kind of annoyed by that, but what you're going to do? I made a height 0 and width 0, which was very helpful. Thank you. And so I want that to be kind of like up into that corner, and then also I want it to be stretched all the way down to the bottom and all the way over to the side. So you can see that we couldn't really do all of this. We could do the left and the right in the universal area, but the top, you know, we either wanted to go to the top of the screen or to the nav bar, and then the bottom, we either wanted to go to the bottom of the screen or to the toolbar. So we couldn't really have done that in both cases. Once you've got it set up the way you want it, you can go ahead and fire up your previews. So we're, of course, going to be using previews quite a bit. And then what I like to do with previews is I like to see at least, you know, one example of an iPhone and an iPad. So if I just put up my iPhone there and then my iPad next to it, I can see that my usable area is kind of defined by this green area. So hopefully you're able to set up those constraints to where you've got a usable area. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add a game board. I want my game board to exist in both iPhone and iPad, so I use you know, this storyboard, which is true for anybody with, you know, regular height and any width. And I'm just going to go ahead and add my game board here. My game board is going to be a view that I just kind of put into this other view. I'm going to choose to make it kind of a brownie color. Make it whatever color you'd like. There you go, a nice mocha. And then as far as the size goes, we're going to define that on the individual storyboards because the iPad is that big square, which doesn't change. And then the iPhone kind of scales depending on the phone's width. So we're going to do each one different, and the iPad one's going to be easier. So let's go over and do the iPad one. So you can see this hopping around between storyboards is a pattern that you're going to be using if you're designing for multiple devices. And on the iPad version, what we're going to do is we just want this thing to be defined to be centered within the usable area. So I could go ahead and kind of get that to about the right spot. So there it is there. And then what you can do is you can center it into the usable area in a number of ways. You could say center horizontal in container by right-click drag. You could also do that by selecting it and then using the menu. You could say editor, align, vertical in container, and it'll add that vertical constraint. Oh, also, I wasn't naming them over here. I meant to be doing that. So this is kind of like the usable area. And then this one here is the game board. And then as far as the size of this thing in the iPad, what I want to do is I just want to constrain it to a fixed width of 670 by 670. And the reason that I picked those numbers is if you were to remember the image size, that was the exact image size that was 670 by 670. Also, if you remember how big the iPad is, it's 1024 by 768. So 670 will fit in either portrait or landscape and leave us a little bit of space, which is nice. So that's actually why I want those to be the dimensions. If you want it to actually snap to those, you can highlight it and you can hit Option Command equals, and then it'll show up kind of in that view. You'll also notice that the view that Apple gave you is basically 768, which is the biggest square that you can guarantee will be present on the landscape or portrait version of the iPad. So that one was easy. No big deal there. If we go over to the iPhone, though, it's going to be a little bit harder. So here's kind of a reminder of what we're doing on the iPhone. So what we want is we want something that's 20 pixels from the left, 20 pixels from the right, and then as it gets bigger and smaller, it actually like keeps the aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio of that image, if you go look at it, is 280 by 310. So we want to make sure that's the aspect ratio that we keep. So what I'm going to choose to do in setting this guy up is I'm going to start off just by making its dimensions 280 by 310. And then I'm going to click on Maintain Aspect Ratio. And so I'm going to add that constraint. And so you can see that actually it does a reduction on it. So it keeps the aspect ratio to 28 by 31. Other things I want to do is I want to make it 20 pixels from the left. So I'm just going to, I don't even bother dropping it on there. I'm just going to say constraint to the left and right. So 20 from the edge, right? So I'm not doing relative to the margin. 20 on the left, 20 on the right. Add those two constraints. As far as the height go, I want it to be roughly centered in the container, but actually I want it to be centered for the board plus the label. So I'm actually going to take the board and move it down 30, which is what I've figured out because the label is 60 total. So I'm going to move it down 30. If you want it to be centered in the container vertically, you can right-click drag to the parent. That's one way to do it. And you can say, oops, that didn't give me the option. I guess I'll do it the other way because I didn't really care which way I did it. Editor, pen, vertical, center, and container. Now, if you do it that way, the way I just did it, you're going to have to actually go back and make it off a constant of -30. So you're going to actually have to move it down 30. Once you do that, you should see it should switch to a yellow circle, and you can click on Fix Misplacement this way. You could have also used the Command Option equals, and hopefully that'll put it just where you want it. So we should hopefully have some goodness going on here. So we've got kind of our board about where we want it. Let's go ahead and add the label, just so we can see the label on top of it. Note that the iPad didn't need a label because its label is going to be up in the nav bar. I'm going to go ahead and just make it go all the way across. I left basically the same margin on each side. It doesn't really matter which way you choose to do it. I'm just going to say 8 and 8, that's fine. If you did 20, 20, that'd be fine too. I'm going to put it right in the middle, and I'm going to make it a font size of a bold 40. So I'm going to switch it to bold, and I'm going to type in the value 40, which I realize is off your screen there, but you can see it typed right there. And then what I want to do is I want to make it 12 pixels above the label. So I can move it to about 12. Looks like I hit 8. I'll say 12 pixels above the label, or sorry, above the board. Once you've got it about where you want it, you can hit Command Option Enter, and it'll snap it to right where it should be, and it's going to say extern. I'm intentionally doing these things fast just because it's a video, and you can always pause it, and you can kind of review what's going on. I suspect that you're going to have to pause it and kind of do it, and then see if you got the right thing. So at that point, it should start looking pretty good. So here's our preview. We've got an iPhone, which looks good. We've got an iPad, which looks pretty good. You should also probably check it out in like a couple of different iPhones. So if you throw on like a small one or a ginormous one, it should maintain that aspect ratio, which admittedly is a little hard to see here, and grow with the view. You should also check the iPad in both portrait and landscape. So landscape has a little buffer on the top and bottom, and then portrait has a little bit of buffer on the left and right. And it should look halfway decent in both. Now, the one thing that doesn't look very good is the font size in the iPad of this extern is really small. So let's fix that. So in order to fix it, we're going to have to make connections to our code. So the connections to our code, we're going to use the automatic view of the view controller. And then what we want to do is we want to connect the label in the iPhone. So now I'm on this label. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect the label here. And I'm going to call it the game state label. So that's going to connect the label, and that's pretty much like we've always done. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to go connect the label for the nav bar as well. Now what I could do on this is I could go ahead and connect the what's called the nav bar item. So I could connect where it says X's turn. I'm actually gonna, and I'll show you why in a second, connect the nav bar itself as an outlet. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to call it the game state nav bar. And the reason I wanted to do that is because that's the only way I know how to fix the font is from the nav bar. And if I grab the nav bar item, then I don't know how to fix the font. So let's go ahead and fix the font. So let's go look at our code. And let's go in here and we'll just add a little bit of code to view.did.load to fix that font of the nav bar. So I'm just going to grab the game state nav bar and I'm going to set the title text attributes, which is probably new to you. I don't expect you to learn much here, but I expect you to be able to type it so that you can get it to work. What we're going to do is we're going to pass in a dictionary, and we're going to say NS font attribute name, and then we're going to give it a UI font using a system size. Oh, no, that's not what I want. A bold system font of size, and I'm going to pass in a size of 34. So that's just going to make that a little bit bigger. Sorry, my wrapping here is going a little crazy. But if you run it on an iPad, you should see that actually change it. So if I run it on, say, an iPad 2, so it should show up, and you can see it's got a nice big font there. And we picked that font because that's about all the more that we could fit in the landscape version. So there, it's looking pretty good on an iPad. Obviously, we've got white and green here, but eventually this green's going to go away. And then if you wanted to, you could also run it on an iPhone just to kind of make sure that it looks good. You could also check to make sure that the rotate is still looking the way we want it to do. So here it's what it looks like in portrait, and then landscape it successfully doesn't rotate. And if you wanted to, you could try it on all the different iPhones, but I kind of prefer to use the preview window. All right, so that's it for this time. We've set up these views that kind of help us make this flexible layout, and then later we'll make them clear. And we've connected our two labels so that we could actually set those in code later. And we'll worry about actually setting them later in this exercise. All right, see you next time where we're going to add some buttons.